specialists going into spring camp. Now you've got a whole new specialist group essentially coming in for fall camp. What is that like? You talked a little bit about how aggressive you guys were going to be in the off season. What was that process like, getting some of those faces?
Well, I just think, looking at what our needs were and then utilizing a combination of the portal, combination of high school, finding a baseball player making a transition, just looking for the right mix of guys and what we were trying to find athletically for each one of the three position groups and the 2 spots in each group. So we knew we were going to have a room of 6 and just trying to find the 6 best guys for that.
What's the challenge of turning over that unit again after spring? I mean, you come in now with all new faces again. What's that challenge for you and your coaching?
Well, I think the challenge is finding out who's going to be the guy in each one of those spots, right? And just determining. And the wonderful thing about specialist world is it's very objective, right? It's quantifiable. You're not looking at a lot of conjecture or anything like that. You've got numbers that tell you player A is better than player B, and so you've got to find that. Those guys have done a great job. They all got here in the summertime. They've worked well as a group together. They all know each other well. We're holding all combinations open, so all the holders have worked with all the snappers, who've worked with all the kickers, so you try to keep that mix. And now it's proof in the pudding. Now you got to find out who that guy is. We've got an interesting mix. Try to, really what we've got, if you look at it, is you've got a mix of young and old, in experience versus inexperience, both at the kicker spot, all three really, right? You've got Noe Ruelas, who's a grad transfer who, comes to us from JMU, who had a solid, really good year last year. And then we've got Noah McHugh, and Noah's a guy that I actually saw when I was at Rice, from Dallas Jesuit, and so you've got a grad guy that's got 1 year left, and one guy coming in with 5. The long snapper, you got Dalton Riggs, who's been a starting snapper in the Big 12, coming from BYU, backed up by Rockland Kelly, who's a true freshman, coming out of the Dallas area too, and then at the punter spot, you've got Anthony Veneri, who's a guy that started for 2 years at Buffalo, transferred to Ohio State, was the backup at Ohio State a year ago, and then you've got Mason Denneberg, who's really a true freshman, right? That's got 5 out in front of him, but was a first-round draft pick in baseball, and is now in high school. Had been a very good punter, quarterback, all-around good athlete, and so now he's making the transition from baseball to football. So I like that. I like the old young combination in the room. I like the competitive nature of the room, and the work ethic. I like the athleticism that's in the room right now too.
Tell us about Dalton Riggs. I guess he had a special introduction. We heard a little bit about it when he introduced himself to the team. Did he do something a little bit out of the ordinary? Or
Dalton is extremely flexible. So he went up, introduced himself, and you got to kind of do something. And, he says, hey, I'm not really a good singer, I'm not a really good dancer, but I'm really flexible, and he just popped into the splits. If you're looking at a bunch of football players looking around going, woof, he just jumped down in there. So that was his intro to the team. And
did you almost pass out? I mean, with the idea of this is you're could be your long snapper,
Interestingly enough, I had a long snapper at Cal, a young man by the name of Nick Sundberg, who went on and snapped for at that time the Redskins / Commanders now for 10 years. I want to say Nick was in the league, and Nick was a guy that could do the splits too. So it's not the first time I'd seen it done by a snapper, but I did not know he could do that. And with the way he just jumped into it and did it was impressive, to say the least.
How did the guys respond? They
thought, well, first of all, they all moaned and groaned because they thought he might, they're like, oh, that looks painful. And then they were like, that's really impressive. So they got a kick out of it, guys. Guys are guys. There was the moan groan to the applause. So it was good.
Is this fall camp? Is this an open competition for these spots, or do you have in your mind who's going to probably take over each of these?
I think one is competition's real, right? It's always open. But what you would say is that the idea is that the experience of Noe Ruelas at kicker gives him a significant leg up. Dalton, same thing. Dalton and Rockland. I think the punting situation is one that's completely wide open. I would say right now, you would say, hey, look, I have a tendency early on to list everything as an or anyway. But, Noe and Dalton have experience over the two younger guys. Anthony has experience over Mason, but I think the punting one is just a little bit, we're going to find out. And again, if the young guy's better than the old guy, he plays. There are no labels. You can't, in today's world, man, you can't label walk-on scholarship, freshman, senior. That stuff all goes out the window. You've got to play the best player. And, again, like I said, quantifiable in our world, man. We live in that world. We live in a number crunch world. And he who can get the ball back accurately and with good timing and protect, he's going to be the snapper. The kid that puts the ball through the pipes, the greatest percentage, he's going to be the kicker.
What stands out about Ruelas?
I think with Noe, just a couple things. One, he's got great range. He's got a leg that you can walk back quite a ways. He's kicked in games before. He's got experience. I like his fundamental technique. He's really repeatable. And those are all things you look for. He's very confident in what he does and how he goes about his business. He's very businesslike. He's been he's well trained, and those are all positive things for you. And he's been out there. He's been under the lights. He's trotted out there. In game situations. So those are the things that pop out with him.
What about Mason? A guy you just talked about, a guy who's coming from the baseball background, who did have some football, obviously, early on, but what has been the adjustment for him? What have you seen from him, I guess, coming in, to being able to kind of step in and actually compete with him?
The one thing that's tough is not having been there for, he wasn't there for spring, right? So we don't get a lot of time. We don't really get time with those guys, very much time. But I think just the strength he carries is this guy's been a professional. He has that kind of work ethic. That's the way he's going to approach things. And I think that for right now, that's got to be his superpower, as he readjusts to putting a football and, just doing what we're trying to get done and knocking off a lot of rust. Tremendous athlete, obviously, right? But again, his superpower is just the guy that's going to work like a pro. He's been somebody that's been on top of everything. As far as his off-season work goes, the weight room says that, all six of these guys, the weight room says have done a great job this spring or this summer, so that's great. But, now I'll get a chance to really get more hands-on with those guys. So we'll get a chance to really see where they're at. But just for him, it's just him and Anthony, in the punting world. It's really linear. You got to be able to live in that linear world, and
he's a little older too. Even his guy who's
he brings a sense of maturity with it, and you got to realize this is a guy that has been to the top of the mountain. He's been to the valley. He's been to the valley too. And I think anybody that's gone through some of the things that he's gone through, just trying to compete at that level, and the margin for error being as narrow as it is, and he'd had some tough injuries that obviously didn't help his baseball career, but this is a guy that's been in the fire, so that's a plus that he brings with him. But and Anthony's been a starter. He's punted in D1 games, so both those guys bring that kind of mentality. To go get it. So,
is it your preference to have a guy kicking extra points, field goals, and kicking off? Is that what you prefer to do?
Here's the deal. You got three different things, three different phases, and really you're going to put the best of the best in there, right? And so, I've had one guy do all three twice in my career.
You don't want that again.
No, ideally that's not ideally what you want. No. And we won't have that this year. But the idea that if a guy can kick off and do field goals and extra points, that's great. But if there's another guy that's a great kickoff guy for you, that's going to give you an opportunity to make that unit better, then that's what you do. So I look at all three of them as separate deals, and then we see how that comes out, how it plays out, right? Does it play out? Does it end up being the kicker? And oftentimes it is. The guy does both, you know, and he should be able to.
I know you've been doing this a long time. Is there a season maybe that comes to mind that was memorable for you, or maybe your special teams ended up winning a bunch of games for the team, or is there something that kind of, looking back on your career, kind of stands out as most memorable, whether it was an individual game, individual season?
I
know there's a lot that's going to be cycling through.
There's a ton of great moments, and there's a lot of guys, and you know, I would say this to you know, I don't want to take somebody that I don't want to diminish some of the great things that have happened. You know, I think you always look back at sometimes. You know, you look back at teams, and you look back at seasons, and you look at sometimes it's a team that just overcame a ton of adversity. Sometimes it's, you know, I grew up on the West Coast, and you know, I spent, you know, if you grew up on the West Coast and you look at bowl games and things like that, right? The pinnacle is the Rose Bowl. Yeah. So, you know, a memorable season for me is my first one at Stanford. You know, in 2012, we had a chance to win the Pac-12, and we did. And got a chance to go to the Rose Bowl, beat Wisconsin. I think that first Rose Bowl is always a memory, but gosh, there's so many memories though. I mean, I can go back to, I was talking, you know, the bottom line is I told I've got a young guy that played for me at Rice. It's my assistant here, Garen Hargan, and I told him today, I said, you know, I said, you got to, I said, you know, it was 42 years ago, man, that I walked on the field as a young graduate assistant for the first time. And, you know, I was telling him stories about just, you know, my first job there was they gave me a blank grass field and said, we need 2 practice fields and 5 rows of 5-yard squares. Here's some kerosene, here's some string, make it happen. Don't forget the hashes and the numbers. Yeah, and I was like, wait, what? Yeah. And, but, you know, that's that first year, and you know, that has great memories too, you know, and just teams that have overcome a lot, you know, a lot of players and special plays. And, you know, one of the plays, you know, it was, for me, is when I got hired at Stanford, they had just lost in the Fiesta Bowl in double overtime to Oklahoma State. Okay, and that was in Andrew Luck's last season. And when David Shaw hired me, they had a freshman kicker the year before, and he had missed a field goal at the end of regulation at the end of the first overtime with a chance to win. And so part of the challenge there was just rebuilding this guy's confidence. Obviously a really talented player. And that next year, we're in Eugene, Oregon, in Autzen Stadium, and playing in Autzen's always a treat. It's really loud, really tight quarters, you know. And at that time, Oregon's ranked above us, and you know, we're playing in the Pac-12 North, and they're in the North, and this is a gotta-win-it game, right? Well, it comes down to a game winner, you know, a walk-off game winner, and this kid hit the game winner. And you know, so you talk about a great moment. That's a great moment because you helped this. You saw this guy go from just completely still, in spring in the offseason, just, you know, still dealing with the fact that I've missed these 2 kicks and trying to clear that memory, and then to watch him be able to go and then do something great. And you know, and that's a year also that we end up going to the Rose Bowl, and you know, so you know, that was a great moment just to watch a kid go through that.